Welcome to Israel, Islam and End Times. My name is Daniel Secomb. I'm the founding director of the ministry. It gives me great pleasure to be able to interview Dr. Michael Brown. He is widely considered to be the world's foremost Messianic Jewish apologist. He is an international speaker on themes of spiritual renewal and cultural reformation, and he has debated Jewish rabbis, agnostic professors and gay activists on radio, TV and college campuses. He holds a Ph.D. in Near Eastern Languages and Literatures from New York University and is the author of 27 books. Please enjoy this exclusive interview. Dr. Brown, thank you so much for joining with us here at Israel, Islam and End Times. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Hey Daniel, it is absolutely great to be here with you.
Dr. Brown, we're living in a time when there's incredible upheaval among the nations. What has happened to our world since the beginning of the 21st century?
Well, we're in a period of increasing instability for quite a number of reasons. A major one is the rise of radical Islam and this sense of this potential worldwide threat that's hard to measure and hard to monitor. And there's been so much destabilizing in the Middle East, that's greatly increased the world chaos. And then also information is just so much more available. So in the old days, something might happen in one part of the world and the other part of the world doesn't even know about it. Now, as things are unfolding, we're watching the brutality or the chaos right on our cell phones in a matter of minutes. And there's also a sense of a lot of turmoil within the United States, the rise of Russia and its involvement again in the Middle East, China becoming more and more of a world power, just a number of things all rising together that give that feeling of increasing instability.
Do you see pattern prophecy at work with events in the past correlating with future events?
It seems that with many biblical prophecies, there was an expectation they would all happen within a certain period of time, and yet they partly happened, making us understand that the rest is yet to come. So just as there was a return from Babylonian exile, the Jewish people back to the land, now there's been a return from all around the world back to the land. I personally believe that a lot of what's written in the Gospels with the conflict between Jewish believers and Jewish religious leadership is going to play itself out again in the land of Israel. I believe that the world attention on Jerusalem will happen in ways beyond what we've seen so far, so that Zechariah 12 and Zechariah 14 passages like that can be fulfilled. But I'm not prepared to set any dates in that regard. That's often easily misunderstood. But certainly, the generation since 1948 or since 1967, those generations have more potential of seeing the end come to pass than previous generations.
2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 11 speaks of a powerful delusion or a strong delusion for those who refuse to love the truth. And we're now living in a day where men can identify as women and women can identify as men and can freely enter each other's public restrooms. Are we witnessing that powerful delusion unfolding in the United States?
It's possible that we are. We're certainly witnessing some type of strong delusion. At the very least, the Romans 1 type of principle where God gives people over to their desires or to their lusts or to their folly. And as I've looked at things in America, in particular where I live, I've monitored it in other parts of the world as well. As I've looked at things in America, it's mind-boggling that certain things are being accepted. It's mind-boggling that things have proceeded as quickly as they have. I was expecting much of this. I'd written about a lot of it before it happened, but to see it happen with such rapidity, to see that just a few years back, say, the transgender issue was quite marginal, and now you have Bruce Jenner celebrated as Woman of the Year, and the federal government threatening that if a children's school won't let a 15-year-old boy share a locker room with a 15-year-old girl and play on the girls' basketball team, that they'll lose federal funding. It's almost as if people have drunk some type of potion and are not even thinking clearly anymore. So it may not be that final delusion, but it's certainly a delusion.
When the disciples asked Jesus what would be the signs of his return, the very first thing he said was, "Watch out that no one deceives you." And then later he says, "Many will fall away from the faith." Do you believe that we are seeing a great falling away with many churches in the West?
We are seeing a great falling away, but in most of the world, it's not happening. The reverse is happening. Yeah. The harvest is incredible in Africa. The harvest is incredible in Asia. The harvest is incredible in Latin America. So we may be seeing in the West a Laodicean type of church that thinks it's rich, increased in wealth, and has need of nothing, when in fact it's wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. But in many other parts of the world, it's more like the church in Smyrna, which is persecuted, which doesn't have much in this world, but is strong in the Lord. Or Philadelphia, which even though is small in strength, does not deny the Lord. So I think we can be reading too much into our own experience to make it universal. But if this apostasy continues to spread and goes worldwide, then that will be it. This much we know, deception is very deceiving. And we need to major on the majors, keep the basics, the main things, to avoid deception.
In regard to the rise of homosexuality that we're seeing happening rapidly in the West, Romans 1 talks about God handing people over to shameful lusts because they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Is this what we're seeing happening in our modern society?
Well, certainly we see a progression in human society where people turn away from God for idols. He gives us over to our folly, and then over to the lusts of the flesh, and then over to wrong uses of the flesh, and on it goes. So although you have plenty of people who are homosexual who didn't want to be homosexual, that they were shocked to find that they were attracted to the same sex, many grew up in the faith and have wrestled with these things. So it's not as if each individual person has gone through some stage of reprobation or being given over to perversion. But when you see these things celebrated in society, when you see the redefinition of marriage, we're certainly being given over to our own fleshly and earthly desires. And there's no other way to explain that on the heels of the sexual revolution, or from my perspective, the best way to explain on the heels of the sexual revolution, you also now have gay activism rising up. And I remember being at a pro-life rally in front of an abortion clinic, and the main, most vocal people opposing us were Satanists, atheists, and gays and lesbians. And I thought, what an odd mix of people, and yet there was this attack on all these levels on the culture of life and male-female reproduction somehow, and man being in the image of God. So somehow there are spiritual forces that tie this together.
Do you agree that the rise of homosexuality is the final state or the final stage of a pagan nation?
Well, you can make a good argument for it historically. That is the last stage of a decadence or indulgence or departure from the norm, and that there are many who say that when a nation goes that way, it never comes back. We're all concerned about that, but I see it as part of a larger issue. And many of us in America are greatly burdened to pray for revival, greatly burdened to call the nation to repentance. So we're in a dire state. This is one symptom among a number. And while you can make the historical argument that no nation is turned back, with God all things are possible, that's where I leave my hope.
Yeah. Jesus said that the state of society we should expect preceding his return would be similar to the days of Noah or of the days of Lot. Do you believe that the current state of our culture reflects that of those times?
There are two distinctly different ways I would answer that. The one, when he's speaking about the days of Noah, he does say people were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage until the end came. In other words, they were just going about their normal lives. That could be what he's talking about. Or the same with Lot. It was normal life one day, next day, flee the city. So he could just be saying people are going to be living their lives and oblivious to what's happening, and then suddenly the end comes. It is possible, as some would argue, that he's drawing a parallel to the wickedness of the days of Noah. The earth was filled with violence in those days. There's actually rabbinic tradition that says one of the sins before the flood was men being with men and women being with women. Again, it's just rabbinic tradition. The question is, where do they get that from, and is it accurate? And then there's the issue of the Nephilim and angelic beings apparently taking on human form and copulating with women, and a mixed human race, and so some type of demonic interaction. Some people believe these things will happen again. To me, it's an open question. The most plain meaning is, as it was in the days of Noah, that they were just oblivious to the end coming and going on with normal life. That's going to happen. But the days of Noah do suggest a time of extreme wickedness and judgment. And as I read Scripture, my understanding is a time of parallel extremes. The harvest is the end of the age, and there's both good and bad. It'll be the greatest activity of the kingdom of God we've ever seen, the greatest activity of the kingdom of Satan. Just like one part of the earth is bright while the other part of the earth is dark, I see that happening in the spiritual realm. And then, of course, the ultimate triumph of the kingdom with the Messiah's return.
How do we reach out to the homosexual with love and compassion while taking a firm stand against homosexuality?
Yeah, we need hearts of compassion with backbones of steel. We need to reach out to the people with compassion, resist the agenda with courage. Now here's the problem. When I stand against the redefining of marriage, a gay couple is going to think that I hate them. They're going to think I demean their relationship. I don't consider them worthy of marriage. I understand that they're going to feel put off by that. So what we have to do is we stand for what's right socially. We stand for what's in the best interest of society and what's in the best interest of our kids and family. And we honor the Lord with that, even if it means people are going to hate us. But we quite intentionally are relational. That I don't want homosexuality to be the issue. I want the issue to be you're my neighbor, and I want to love you as my neighbor. And I want to treat you as I treat my neighbor and bring the gospel to you. If they make homosexuality the issue, fine, then we'll discuss it. But your average gay and lesbian person is not an activist. They probably suffered a lot of rejection over the course of their lives. They probably have a perception that Christians hate them and think that they themselves are an abomination and hated by God. So there are a lot of bridges to build, but we do it with a broken heart and prayer. We ask for a baptism of love so that if you cut us, we bleed love. It's not artificial, it's genuine. And then we seek to build relationships, realizing that many are broken, many are hurt like everyone else, and it's the same gospel answer. And to the extent we focus on leading people to Jesus as opposed to trying to get them to be heterosexual, we will do much better.
Let's now talk about Islam. What do you make of Islam taking center stage with world current affairs?
Well, Islam, of course, is rapidly growing, even though it's primarily located in certain parts of the world where it's been its strongest. It hasn't been as successful making converts in the West and things like that. It grows mainly by birth and then by taking over. The fact is it is growing rapidly, up to 1.6 billion or more people around the world. The mayor of London is now Muslim. And look, Christians want to evangelize. We want to spread the faith. We want everyone to know who Jesus is. We want to make disciples of the nations. Muslims want to spread their faith, but Islam means submission. So their goal is basically to spread the faith and to take over with that faith. It is a legal religion, etc. So this has been coming for years. Europe has been oblivious to it. America has often not wanted to mention it by name. But with the rise of radical Islam, which perhaps represents 10 or 20% of the world population, it's become unavoidable. And we could have seen it coming. And then some of it, America on a certain level has had Middle Eastern policies and interventions that may have been good for the short term, but not for the long term. So there's some of the problems we're facing now that we actually helped create. We meant well, but ended up misguided.
Regarding the refugee crisis, what are your thoughts on the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, also known as the OIC, within the UN, dictating the placement of hundreds of thousands of Muslim refugees?
We have to be very, very careful with this. On the one hand, we want to be compassionate, but we've got to be wise. We need to, I believe, any nation with a predominance of Christianity, first give a preference to Christian refugees. They are the ones that really are between a rock and a hard place. They're caught between different Muslim factions. They're even persecuted in refugee camps and things like that. And those who are historically Christian do not have a history of being terrorists. So to the extent, especially as believers, we can get involved, we ought to, but I don't believe the UN has the right to dictate. Every sovereign nation needs to make decisions. Hungary was roundly criticized for closing their borders, but they said, we did this several hundred years ago, and Muslims took over for like 150 years or so. I forget the exact time frame. But they were burned by this previously. If refugees can be properly vetted, and if refugees want to now assimilate into the new culture, then we do whatever we can. It's a massive outpouring of human suffering. But we need to be really careful because this is serving as a Trojan horse for many radicals to enter countries, and their purpose is not to assimilate, their purpose is to destroy.
What does the future hold for these liberal European nations such as Germany, Sweden, and Belgium?
It's a very critical time. There are some who believe that Sweden will definitely fall to Islam, that it's too late. In other words, there are too many Muslims with too much strong position, and with Swedish families being smaller and Muslim families being larger, it's just a matter of time. It's not a matter of Islamophobia or some type of nationalistic xenophobia. It's a matter of wisdom, that as much as there's human suffering, there are enough other Muslim nations that can take in other Muslims. They can more readily open their doors. They have a common religion. In many cases, they have a common language. And to me, that's the most natural solution. I know many are fleeing from countries in Africa. There is great hardship. But unless there can be a real plan to assimilate people into the culture, into the lifestyle, as opposed to changing the culture and lifestyle, it's very, very tenuous. I'm hoping that the European nations will wake up to the reality before it's too late. But if they don't wake up very soon, it will be too late.
There are two current opinions in regard to refugees among Christians at the moment. Some are saying that we need to put a stop to immigration altogether, whereas others are saying we should encourage as many of them to come as possible. How should Christians respond?
If we're going to encourage them to come, then let us encourage them to come into our own homes and communities. Meaning, let's work with different world relief agencies, Christian world relief agencies, that are working with refugees, both Muslim and Christian. They have vetted them more carefully, and we work in conjunction with them to do our part to bring them into the world. The late 70s, early 80s, during the boat people crisis when Vietnam fell, the church I was part of opened its doors, and the pastor basically said, if you have a bed, if you have a couch, if you have a room, you'll take in refugees. So we all did. It became a way of life for us. And we brought in refugees from Vietnam, Cambodia. They stayed in our homes, some for periods of years. Sometimes we had more refugees in our home than our own kids. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time. And of course, they're indebted to us over the years, but we're blessed to have been able to do this. So rather than looking to the government to do this, let Christians do what they can do. I have friends in the state where I live, and their church has sponsored 2 Muslim families. And they are totally engaged with these families. The families have sat with them in tears, overwhelmed at the love that's being shown them. The young people in the family are interested in hearing the gospel and wanting to come to church and things like that. So let the church do what the church does, work with Christian relief agencies, and specifically sponsor people. And there are enough of us that we can sponsor a lot. And it's in an environment where they'll receive the love of God. It's an environment where there's community interaction and where there's much, much, much less chance of terrorist infiltration.
Do you believe that there is any significance with the simultaneous rise of the gay rights movement and the rise of radical Islam?
What strikes me in that is that you have a certain vacuum with the church not fulfilling its role adequately, either just by preaching a message of accommodation to the world or a message of self-satisfaction, almost a narcissistic, crossless kind of message, but the church is not playing the role it's supposed to play as salt and light. So on the one hand, those who have a different vision of life and family, or simply say, hey, this is who we are, we need full rights and expression, as gay activists would say from their perspective, they're going to rise up in that void with all the heterosexual divorce in the church and no-fault divorce in the church and all the problems we're dealing with. We've made a mess of marriage. It makes it easier now for others to reform it and change it and make it into something else. And then at the same time, there's the spiritual vacuum for Islam to rise in. Interestingly, in Europe, they're facing this now where you've got wide open gay rights and wide open Islam, and they're in conflict, and sometimes bloody conflict with radical Islam shedding blood, as we've seen in America as well.
Previously, we discussed how to reach out to the homosexual with love and compassion while taking a firm stand against homosexuality. Do we take the same tact in regard to Muslims?
Yeah, in many ways we are. On the one hand, we want to renounce and expose radical Islam, but we want to do it by name. I've been criticized on both sides for using the term radical Islam. Some criticize me because they say all Islam is radical. Others criticize me because they say that's not really Islam. For me, I want to use it specifically so I can identify something, identify the threat, and identify the extent to which it is a legitimate stream of Islam, but also recognize that the majority of Muslims are not radicals, that your Muslim neighbor or colleague at work is not trying to blow you up or kill you, and that he's grieved over these things and he's afraid he's going to be mistreated. And Muslims tend to be, many of them coming from the Middle East or other parts of the world, tend to be more relational, family-oriented. So all the more we build relations. To the extent we sit down with people, to the extent we befriend them, to the extent we genuinely show them the love of God, take an interest in their lives, and try to serve them and help them come to know the Lord. That's the greatest weapon that we have.
Should Christians be actively contesting the culture wars?
If you're not involved in the culture wars on some level, I question whether you're living out your faith. So the question is, how can you be called to be a light in a dark place without being involved in the culture wars? How can you be called to be salt, which is the moral conscience of the society, among other meetings, without being involved in the culture wars? How can you love God, love your neighbor, love your family, raise your kids in a godly way, conduct yourself in a godly way in your place of business without being involved in the culture wars one way or another? Now many believers consciously stay out of these things, but by staying out, you've now made a statement. Almost everyone I talk to says if I'd lived in the days of slavery, I would have done something. Well, we live in the days of over 50 million babies being aborted. What are we doing? We live in the days of marriage being redefined. We live in the days of loss of religious liberties and freedom. Of course, this is part of our calling. And I ask a real simple question. What's the Great Commission? Go and make disciples. How does a disciple live? How does a disciple live when confronted with injustice? How does a disciple live when your 6-year-old comes home from school crying because there's a boy in the girls' bathroom? How does a disciple live when a whole generation is wiped out by abortion, tens of millions? How does a disciple live? Let's say this person was an alcoholic, wife-beating gambler. Now he comes to faith. Well, he's not going to be wife-beating. He's not going to be gambling. He's not going to be an alcoholic. He's going to live a different life. So it's a simple thing to me. We're called to shine as lights in dark places. We're called to be the moral conscience of the society. So it's just part of what disciples do.
It seems pastors these days are very silent on controversial issues in regard to the culture wars. And on social media, they only ever say positive things with, motivational and leadership quotes and things like that. What would you say to those pastors?
You're doing a terrible disservice to the Lord and a terrible disservice to your people and a terrible disservice to the world itself. First, on a pastoral level, wherever I go, if I ever address issues about homosexuality, transgenderism, there's a line of people often standing there in tears wanting to talk to me. What do I do? My 14-year-old daughter just came out as gay. What do I do? My husband just left me for another man. What do I do? My 4-year-old boy thinks he's a girl. These are pastoral issues. How can we not address these pastoral issues? And if the Lord has called us to be a voice, if the Lord has called us to make his ways known to the world, we're responsible to God. I literally believe that there's blood on the hands of leaders who refuse to address these issues, who refuse to speak out, say, against the shedding of innocent blood, who want to remain neutral because these things are controversial. And then what about the world? How can we help the world? How can we stand for what's right in the world without addressing these things? It's very sad to me that whether I'm here in Australia, all over America, other countries, that people come up to me and they thank me for being a voice. I appreciate that. But what's sad is they say hardly any are speaking on these things. Now, I have so many colleagues that are on the front lines and standing that I sometimes forget that we're relatively few. And it really is a crying shame. And pastors and leaders are going to have to answer to God. It doesn't mean they're all experts on all these issues. Let us come alongside and help. But it absolutely means that they're, in my view, negligent in their duties.
What would you say to Christians who have never been involved in the culture wars, but they have now made the decision to take a stand and to be a voice in the midst of their culture?
I'd encourage folks to visit my website, askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org, and start looking at the articles I've written, start watching the videos there. What are the areas that really burden you? What are the things that concern you? You don't just want to be random about it. What is it that grips you most? There's some people that are so grieved by human trafficking. They've gotten heavily involved with that. There's some, it's pro-life. That's the issue. For others, it's marriage and family. For others, it's the distinction of gender and male and female importance. You've got to see where your heart really beats and then get informed. Start to learn. Start to find out what's going on. And do your best to understand the other position so you can see it through their eyes so that you understand where people are coming from. And then make a difference where you can. Maybe on social media. People share things that I write, and now that triggers a discussion in social media. Now you start to get the flack coming back for it. It could be writing a letter to your local newspaper. It could be a student in school standing up and addressing an issue. Hey, this is not fair. This is not right, what's happening in the school. Do what you can where you are. If you have fear and things like that, ask God to help, and then take steps, and then you'll be amazed what begins to open up. And then always look for it as an opportunity to evangelize. In the midst of the differences in discussion, always look for those that are open to hear the rest of the message.
In regard to the fallout of the Islamic terrorist attack in Orlando, there are numerous sections of the media and leftist figures who are blaming Christians for the atrocity. As Christians, how do we make sense of that?
Well, we understand where they're coming from. It's completely outrageous. It's reprehensible. It's immoral. It's illogical. But where they're coming from is this. By saying that we are sexual deviants, by saying that our lifestyle is an abomination, by saying that our marriage is not really marriage, by kicking us out of your homes, etc. You have created a toxic environment. You've created a deadly environment in which this type of hatred is so common that it was easy for someone to take out a gun and kill us. If it had been a professing Christian who had been inspired by the preaching from their church to go and do this, that would be one thing. This is a Muslim. We have held these views for decades, and we haven't gone around slaughtering gays because that's not what we do. Even the fringe minority with their God hates fag signs and saying it's a good thing that gays died in Orlando in this massacre, they're not calling for people to take up arms, as perverted as they are in what they're saying. So when Muslims, when ISIS is throwing gays off buildings in Syria, that's not the fault of Christians. And if you think of this, to give an analogy, gay activists attack me day and night, others attack me day and night, the most vile, ugly, despicable things you can imagine said to me, death wishes sent me constantly, some sending me notes, we've got a bullet for you on this particular day, etc. Okay, let's say this is coming against Christians day and night, and then one day a Muslim terrorist comes into a church and starts shooting people. Is that the fault of the gay activists? No, of course. There's no connection. So us saying, hey, we love you, but we don't recognize that as marriage because marriage is the union of a man and woman. There's no connection between that and slaughtering gays. It's just part of the narrative. Islam can't be blamed. Radical Islam can't be named. It's the fault of Christians.
We're watching persecution break out against churches in the West. Just how intense do you think it's going to get?
I don't personally believe it's going to get to the intensity like you see in the Muslim world, and the beheadings and the torture and those kinds of things, simply because it's a different culture. Yeah. Now, unless Islam breaks out fully, then we can see the same things in the West. Much of the persecution we endure in the West is on a whole different level. It's verbal, it's in the courts, it's in terms of our rights and our freedoms. But until things turn, I do believe by God's grace they will turn. It's going to get much worse before it gets better. We might lose many of our religious freedoms. I have friends that have lost jobs already. I know people that were kicked out of college programs. I know others that have lost their businesses, had everything taken away from them over this. The list goes on, and it continues to grow. We had our first example of someone going to jail because she couldn't in good conscience cooperate with a judge's mandate. So I think quite a few will see jail. I think there could be more blame shifting so that there's actually violence towards Christians in terms of just outbursts of violence. When you have crowds shouting or holding up signs, throw them to the lions, and equating us with the Taliban and ISIS, they're going to be unstable people that try to attack. This already happened. An unstable gay guy went to carry out a massacre at a Christian organization in D.C., spurred on by an organization that branded that group as a hate group. And he found their location on that map. Thankfully, a guard, after being shot, subdued the guy. Otherwise, there would have been a massacre. So I think it could get out of hand in that respect. But ultimately, as it gets uglier, I do believe people will wake up in America to what's actually happening, that the bullies will overplay their hand.
Now, you believe that the church will be going through the Great Tribulation. Why do you believe that?
Jesus said, in this world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. What we're looking forward to, according to many scriptures, is the appearing of the Lord, the coming of the Lord, the revelation, a public, visible event, not a secret event that catches us out. I see 2 Thessalonians 1 telling us that we will receive relief when the Lord comes in blazing fire, taking vengeance on those who don't know God. John writes in Revelation 1 that he's our brother and companion in the kingdom and tribulation of the Lord. There's nothing that I see that says that we're going to be taken out, but always promises to be kept through. I see in the book of Isaiah the call to go and hide in the inner chambers until his wrath passes by. I see that he kept the children of Israel when the plagues were poured out, that they weren't poured out on Israel. So we're not exempt from the wrath of Satan, we're not exempt from the wrath of man, but the wrath of God is not to be poured out on us. So I don't see anything in terms of a twofold event. The Greek uses the same word for the alleged rapture and the second coming, the same vocabulary, same things are used. Unless someone came and taught me pre-trib rapture and all that, which is, I had to learn it from books, I never would have gotten it from the Bible.
Jesus said in Matthew 24:14, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Now, this obviously hasn't been fulfilled yet, but do you believe that the persecution of Christians in the Great Tribulation could be the catalyst for the spread of the gospel to these nations?
It's possible. Matthew 10, when you're persecuted in one city, flee to another. Acts 8, after the martyrdom of Stephen, there was great persecution, and the believers scattered and preached in other places. That could be. It could also be through internet. It could also be through other means that the gospel gets to places it's never been before. Some try to argue that passage just means the Roman world and it was fulfilled in AD 70. But as I see Revelation 7, a multitude that no one can number from every tongue and tribe, and etc. So to me, it's clear that the gospel must get throughout the whole world. It could be some through persecution and people fleeing. It could be, as Robert Murray McCheyne said in the 1800s, that Jews all around the world, as they come to faith and knowing different languages and cultures, they'll be involved in the finality of the Great Commission. And it could just be through the various means we have to get the message out in ways we never could before.
Will we be seeing Jews and Christians suffering side by side in the Great Tribulation?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a specific period of time that I can name with an exact number of years, that it's this period of time or that period of time, and how long it's going to be. I certainly do believe that at the end of the age we'll have intense tribulation in the midst of great outpouring. But yes, I do expect to see Jews and Christians suffering side by side. It's logical that would happen with common enemies, and that part of that Christian message will be love, sacrificial love for the Jewish people, just like the Corrie ten Booms in the Holocaust, and that'll be part of a glorious witness to our people.
Do you think that the Christian witness to the Jews in the midst of suffering in the Great Tribulation could be the catalyst to provoking them to jealousy and turning them as a nation to the Messiah?
I think it could be a factor. I believe there are a number of things that have to come to pass. There has to be a church really in the fullness of the Lord, in the fullness of the Spirit, that provokes Israel to jealousy. Because it's when Israel sees that the church is enjoying the promises of God and the presence of God and the forgiveness of God and transformed lives, that's part of what provokes them. But you can't get away from that glorious presence. I expect that. I do expect a supernatural love poured out for Israel. And certainly that is something that can provoke to jealousy. Why do they love us like this? Why are they sacrificing for us? We thought they hated us and persecuted us.
Do you believe that there is a purpose behind the Jews taking on the culture and the languages of all the nations that they have been scattered to in order to function in a priestly role to those nations during the millennial reign of Christ?
It's possible. There's a lot of end-time theology that presupposes. We know in Revelation 22 that the kings of the nations bring their glory in to the New Jerusalem. But then, of course, that would be dated post-millennium, so I don't know exactly how everything unfolds. But just to back it up, the purpose in scattering the Jewish people was judgment, but God's a redeemer. So that which is meant for evil and destruction is used for good. I would just say in this world, to the extent we're scattered around the world and come to faith, we can then make God known and fulfill a priestly mission in this world.
What would you say to those who are watching this interview and are getting thirsty for the reality of God in their life?
Thirst is a good thing. Hunger is a good thing. It means you're alive. It means that you're healthy. Many times when people are very sick, cancer victims and things, they get thinner and thinner. They have no appetite. So appetite's a healthy thing. And to the extent of our hunger, to that extent God can fill us. So I encourage people to seek God and with an earnestness, to seek God and cry out to Him and say, God, I've got to have you in my life. I've got to know you. I've got to experience you. I can't serve you from a distance. I can't serve you in a half-hearted way, in a superficial way. until that hunger is almost unbearable. And out of that, God will fill us. I look at it like a rubber band that's pulled back, and we surely think it's going to snap. But when it's pulled back to its limit, when it takes off, it really flies. So the hunger is a healthy thing. And Yeshua says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they'll be filled. He says, if anyone's thirsty, let him come to me and drink. It's out of that hunger and thirst that we encounter God.
For those watching who believe that they are ready, could you lead them in the prayer to accept Jesus in their life?
Understand that every one of us is guilty in God's sight, and by our own works, we're lost. If you stood before God and said, hey, I'm a pretty good person, and look at the moment you stand before him, you'll realize, oh my. When he starts to bring up the thoughts, the things that you did that no one else knows about, the flesh compared to his perfection. So we all need mercy. The amazing thing is that rather than God judging us for what we did, he judged his son. You say, that's not fair. No, it's totally unfair. But that was the arrangement, that he would take our sin, and that's what Paul wrote, when we were yet sinners, Messiah died for the ungodly. So if you believe that to be true, I want you from your heart to say these words: God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I confess to you my guilt, and I believe Jesus took my punishment. I believe Jesus died for me. I believe he rose from the dead. And I confess him as my Lord today. God, with your help, I turn away from everything displeasing. I ask you for a new heart, a new life, so I can live for you for the rest of my life. I ask it in Jesus' name. And friend, if you're sincere in praying that, it's not the words, it's the fact that you meant it from your heart. God himself heard that. He will make himself real to you. And if you start talking to him every day, start reading the scriptures for yourself, if you've got other friends that believe like this, or go to the website for more information, you will not believe what happens in your life. And in the days to come, just like my life was changed as a heroin shooting, LSD using 16-year-old hippie rock drummer in 1971, 45 years, I've never looked back. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to know more about what's happening with Israel, Islam and end times, please go to our website. It's www.israelislamandendtimes.com. Also check out our YouTube channel. We have interviews with world-leading authorities on different topics regarding Israel, Islam and end times, as well as recorded talks from our previous seminars. Also like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter and also on Google+. If you believe in what we're doing with this ministry and you would like to get behind us, support us, then please pray for us. Your prayers are greatly appreciated, and also consider giving financially to the ministry. Please go to our Patreon website at www.patreon.com/IIandET. Thank you very much.